Altogether, it's the members of the Libe Committee, the members of the Subcommittee on Human Rights, Chair Udo Bullmann, most welcome, and the Committee of Development, represented here by Vice President Mercedes Bresso. So please just allow me to welcome you to this exchange of views of us three committees together in order to deal with the issue of our concern, shared concern, refugees, marking World Refugee Day with a spotlight on forgotten crises. In line with UNHCR theme for this year, World Refugee Day, which focuses on the power of inclusion and solutions for refugees. I'm just reminding you, by the way, that in the premises of the European Parliament there is an ongoing exhibition, which was hosted by three distinguished MEPs in this House, Monica Gonzalez, Stefan Bijou, and Janina Ohojska, if I'm pronouncing it right, which are doing it together with the UNHCR, was presented yesterday solemnly with the presence of Vice President Lenarchik of the Commission, on a commissioner on this most relevant and delicate issue of our shared concern. We are presenting here the opportunity to engage in a talk on this sphere of underlying and intertwined conflicts that have been just reignited by the pandemic and goes on with climate change, extreme weather, desertification, all the problems that are involved, environmental, demographic, economic and social challenges which are lying ahead. And without further delay, I'm announcing that there are some guests that have been invited to take the floor. Mr. Bahati Mnyci, I don't know how to pronounce it, agreeing to share his experience of displacement as a refugee, as the impact education has brought throughout all of his life, originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo, refugee in Zimbabwe since 2003, joining us remotely from Italy, where he's completing a master's degree now. Then it'll be Mrs. Yasmine Rockenfeller, Chief of Global Issues of UNHCR Brussels. UNHCR is an absolutely essential international organization in this area. And Mr. Francesco Luciani, Head of Unit for Migration and Forced Displacement of DG INPA of the Commission. And finally, Mrs. Esther Pozo, which is also from the Commission, Head of Asylum Unit of DG Home. But I will simply invite my co-chairs, dear Mrs. Bresso and Udo Bullmann, to say some words before we proceed. Please.
Thank you. I will speak in Italian, so if you need a headphone. Grazie intanto, Presidente.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Development Committee. As has been recalled with this exchange of views, we're celebrating World Refugee Day. Now, we currently have 108 million people who are forcibly displaced across the world, and around 35 million of those are refugees. The rest are internally displaced. And low and middle income countries host 76% of the world's refugees. And it's also because of that that it's important and relevant for our committee to be involved in this meeting. Now, the international community recognises migration as a key issue for the development of the UN's 2030 agenda. But in spite of that, the numbers of refugees and the time they remain as refugees continues to increase. Many people are refugees for long periods of time and they face major economic and life challenges. So we need to focus our efforts to deal with the deep causes that force people to leave their homes and create conditions that can contribute to stability and prosperity in people's country of origin. We're committed to supporting refugees, internally displaced people, and the communities that host them, and to work for sustainable solutions, particularly when it comes to forgotten crises, of which there are many. Humanitarian assistance is significant, but it can't be the only solution. We need to take a threefold approach as is set out in the Nexus. Now I'd like to know from the Commission how they are ensuring that forcibly displaced people are included in our development work, and I look forward to hearing from Mr. Mincie, who originally comes from the DRC and who has been a refugee in Zimbabwe since 2003. We know that the DRC hosts one of the largest populations of displaced people in the world, estimated to be between 5.5 and 6.3 million people. I also look forward to hearing from the UNHCR, which I've always supported, also personally. I look forward to hearing how they can tell us, how we can support refugees and refugee communities to improve their resilience and their self-sufficiency. So thank you very much. I give the floor to Mr. Bullman now, please.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues, dear guests. It's good that we come together on a day like that. We have to remember the 1951 Geneva Refugee Convention and the 1967 Protocol are the cornerstones of the international legal protection framework for all refugees. Legal protection, that means that refugees have rights in their country of refuge, freedom of movements, right to an education, access to courts, and right to a family life, right to live in dignity. But once talking about refugees on a day like that, we also should not be silent on the quality of border regimes, because the life of refugees is determined by the way in which we welcome or not. You know the current debates. You know the position of the Council. We will deal with that, hopefully in a good spirit, proper way. Colleagues are prepared. But let us not stop to dream about borders as places where people meet, where they can exchange experience, where they can learn from each other, and not think of borders as fences where you are rejected and where you feel aggression and hate. We should work on this dream as Europeans. Last but not least, we are in ongoing discussions, and yesterday with the respective commissioner. We are shocked by UN reports giving us insights on the fact that obviously still practices of pushbacks are acted out in the Mediterranean. UN reports speak about the practices of the Libyan Coast Guard, but also about the issue that European institutions are involved, Frontex is involved. And let us promise, colleagues, on a day like that, on the World Refugee Day, that we clarify on that and that we are not silent on malpractices and try to change that according to our legal provisions, which have to be defended. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Now let's get started the discussion. Thank you. It's been actually very, very moving, because it's very intentional the way we are discussing World Refugee Days with the right interlocution, with the right guest speakers which are about to start to share with us their testimonies. We'll get started with Mr. Mincie. I understand that's the way we could pronounce it. Mr. Mincie, from Italy, 7 minutes to you. Are you connected? Yes, you are. Go ahead. Welcome. Welcome to our committee.
Thank you. Dear chairs, honorable members of the European Union, of the European Parliament, I was only 9 years old when my whole world was shattered and I became a refugee. I was playing on the banks of Lake Tanganyika near the village we called home. My brother Kenga was fishing nearby and my sister Mwali was washing the dishes in the waters of the lake. All of a sudden, gunshots ripped through the quiet afternoon. I ran to my siblings and we hid behind some boulders, but the shots continued. It was the beginning of the Kivu conflict, which till this day continues to ravage Eastern DRC. The armed conflict there has displaced millions of people over the past 2 decades. For a while, we hid amidst the rocks, too scared to move. But after a bit, we got up the courage to run home. Everyone else in the village was running in the opposite direction. They were racing towards the lake in hopes of escaping on the boats that were normally used to travel from one village to another. But we needed to find our family. When we got to our house, it was empty. Our parents and 12 other siblings were nowhere to be found. I still remember how alone and scared I felt at that moment. Without my parents, my 17-year-old brother took charge. He saw we had no choice but to escape along with our neighbors. We ran back to the lake with nothing more than the clothes on our back and squeezed onto one of the boats. The boat headed south. The deep waters of Lake Tanganyika, the world's longest lake, stretched out infinitely before us. We sailed for days, traveling roughly the distance between Brussels and Geneva. My brother, my sister, and I disembarked in Zambia. We were reeling from trauma. We knew no one and had no idea where to go and what to do. As we were searching for something to eat, a kind truck driver pitied us and smuggled us across the border of Zimbabwe, where we were eventually given a refugee status. While we were relieved to be in a safe place, we struggled to move forward with our lives. I just wanted to be a regular kid and go to school. Having lost my home, my parents, and most of my siblings, school was the only place where I could imagine finding hope again. But scraping together the money for school fees was a huge obstacle. My siblings and I were living in a refugee camp where we relied on food aid. My brother was determined to provide us more than our meager rations. He was also determined to secure us a ticket to a brighter future. He worked tirelessly, toiling all hours at odd jobs outside the camp. He spent all of his earnings on extra food and enrolled my sister and me in school. In a word, my brother sacrificed his own future to provide us as a primary school boy and then to university. I was very proud of my achievement. And I'm especially proud today at the age of 29, knowing that just 6 out of every 100 refugees managed to make it to university. By comparison, 40% of non-refugee youth attend university worldwide. But my family's financial problems meant that no matter how hard I studied, my academic future was up in the air. After my second year in college, I all but lost hope being able to complete my degree because we could no longer afford the fees. At that very dark moment came in the form of Duffy Scholarship, which helps promising refugee students attend university in their host countries. A similar initiative today has allowed me to continue my studies beyond where I thought possible. Thanks to unique program that helps refugees attend universities in Italy. I'm now pursuing a master's degree in global management and politics at Luis University in Rome. But education is not only about getting a degree, particularly for refugees. For us, school offers more than knowledge. It's a place to make new friends and heal old wounds. It's a place to discover hidden talents and forge radiant destinies. Because I got the chance to study, my own future looks bright. I hope to make the most of what I've learned, to give back to the communities that welcome me, and to continue to advocate for others like me. None of this would have been possible without my brother. His tireless work and tenacity propelled me from a tent in a refugee camp, a university lecture hall. But it shouldn't be that way. No refugee child should depend on blind luck or a guardian angel. All refugee children, wherever they are, should have the opportunity to study. Just like you, all refugee children deserve the chance to become the best possible versions of themselves. According to Mandela, education is the most powerful weapon which we can use to change the world. I thank you.
Thank you. We thank you, Mr. Mnyci. It is us to thank you, and I think that warm round of applause actually means that we celebrate that you made it. And we're happy to have you here among us. As a European, you belong. Thank you for your testimony. And now we hear from Mrs. Rockenfeller. If you are live with us, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Dear chairs, dear colleagues, honorable members of the European Parliament, thank you for having me here, and thank you, Mr. Bahati Mnyci, for sharing your experience. It's so important that legislators hear refugee voices like yours. Your story is inspiring, but sadly it's also the exception. Too few refugees manage to unlock similar opportunities to thrive, particularly those who find themselves caught up in forgotten crises that have long since fallen out of global headlines. Having a frank discussion and dialogue with the EU about the situation of those forced to flee globally helps to shift the focus back to where needs are and where solutions lie. Solutions were also the theme of this year's World Refugee Day. As already mentioned earlier, 2022 saw the highest number of forcibly displaced people ever recorded, 108 million people, including Palestinians under UNRWA's mandate. In 2023, we will likely see even more people forced to flee from Ukraine, Sudan, Afghanistan, and the DRC, driving the numbers further up. This is particularly devastating considering that most of them find themselves hosted in low and middle-income countries. That means actually that most of the responsibility for responding to forced displacement is being shouldered by the countries that can least afford it, and mostly by immediate neighbors. For example, in Lebanon, 1 out of 3 inhabitants is a refugee. The EU's response to the Ukraine situation has been nothing short of exemplary, and there is much to be learned from Europe's experience of welcoming refugees. The activation of the Temporary Protection Directive is an extraordinary example of solidarity. It has proven many political statements wrong, actually, that Europe is full, that there is no space for relocation or increased resettlement, that there is no public support for refugees. The negotiation of the new pact provides an important opportunity to ensure that the same treatment shown to those fleeing Ukraine is applied to anyone seeking asylum, regardless of their origin, whether this is inside or outside Europe's borders, and irrespective of whether this is high or low on the political agenda. My role here is to draw your attention to forgotten crises that need it most, to name a few: Bangladesh, Colombia, Lebanon, Chad, and Yemen. They're protracted forced displacement situations that receive insufficient international aid. They also often lay out far from the media's and the public's attention. We need EU leadership to change this and engage in dialogue with these countries. We need the EU to adapt its financing tools to fit the reality of mobile populations. And we need the EU to share its lessons with host countries to ensure no one is left behind as we progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. These countries desperately need solidarity and support. As MEPs, you can play a crucial role in making that happen. Here are 6 concrete areas. The European Parliament can make a real difference in the lives of refugees and communities that host them, which are out of the spotlight. So one is about flexibility. The EU's funding mechanisms must become more flexible. When emergencies hit, UNHCR and our partner organizations often found ourselves on the front lines of volatile situations. As it stands, the Commission has among the world's most tightly earmarked budgets. Earmarking prevents us from shifting funds to meet unfolding needs and hamstrings our ability to provide life-saving aid to those who need it most. The European Parliament has been the strongest advocate for flexible funding. We are encouraged by the recent Council conclusions and call on you to work with the Council and the Commission towards finding concrete ways to making the EU's budget agile. Second, transparency. The EU is already taking a leading role in promoting global solidarity. It is one of few donors that have adopted progressive financial instruments such as the NDC, with its 10% spending target for migration and forced displacement. However, to date, it is impossible to fully track how much, for what purpose, and where the EU will have spent these 10%, or to differentiate between forced displacement and migration. This must be reported on transparently to the European Parliament, the Council, and all other relevant stakeholders. The OECD tracking system on financing for forced displacement will assess each DAC member's contribution to responsibility sharing, which is an excellent opportunity for the EU to showcase its support to global solidarity and to meaningfully report on its spending. Political leverage and the midterm review. Number 3. Many countries experience both internal displacement and hosting refugees. The EU has a golden opportunity at its disposal, the national envelopes of the NDC, the multi-indicative programs. These envelopes allow for political leverage with affected countries to adopt inclusive policies, better protection as well as solutions. The midterm review poses an opportunity to bring forced displacement higher on the EU sectoral priorities. And I call on you in your important oversight role to help adjust the EU national development envelopes to better reflect global solidarity beyond the EU's borders. UNHCR, with its protection and deep field expertise, stands ready to guide the EU on how to make the sectoral envelopes fit for purpose. Development and peace by default. Also, this was mentioned. Most displacement situations and forgotten crises are protected. Think Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, and Myanmar, as well as most situations in sub-Saharan Africa. Humanitarian response cannot lift countries out of crisis alone. Development and peace need to come in right from the outset. Root causes need to be better understood and addressed. Your support to ensure coordination and harmonization of EU and member states' instruments in the spirit of the triple nexus will be critical. Fifth, it's a little bit longer, sorry. Resettlement. EU investment and support should not stop at providing political and financial support to these countries. Within its programming, it should strive towards solutions. UNHCR estimates that more than 2 million refugees are in need of resettlement in 2023, which is about 500,000 more compared to 2022. UNHCR's target is to resettle 100,000 refugees in 2023 and 110,000 in 2024. The EU must rise to the occasion and commit to at least 30% of these admissions each year. And finally, 6, education. Listening to Bahati, we heard the power of education to change the refugee's life. In fact, nearly half of all refugee children do not attend school at all, and only 6% gain access to tertiary education. It is crucial we work together to break down those barriers that are keeping them out of classrooms and universities. Access to education can be a powerful tool of complementary pathways, allowing refugees to not just survive but to thrive. The EU has repeatedly demonstrated its willingness to lead by example and be a decisive player in reaching this goal. Today, I call you to be advocates to ensure that the EU continues to invest in refugee education at all levels. For example, by including refugees into Erasmus+, and supporting initiatives such as the Daffy Scholarship Program, like Bahati is participating in. Dear chairs, honorable members of parliament, the 1951 Refugee Convention and the EU were born from the same tragedy. Both aim to save future generations from the devastation wrought by war. The strength of both is found not only in a resolute legal basis for preventing conflict and protecting people, but also, and just as importantly, in a deeper sense of solidarity. No one chose to be a refugee. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely. We thank you. We thank you too. We've heard too much compelling testimonies for sure, but we're about to hear a third. We thank you, Mrs. Rockenfeller. Now we hear from Mr. Luciani. Mr. Luciani, the floor is yours for the next 6 minutes.
Good morning, honourable members of the European Parliament, distinguished guests and fellow colleagues. On this momentous occasion of the World Refugee Day, we come together to reflect on how we can join forces to face the global challenge of the forced displacement that has reached an unprecedented level of gravity. How can development actors offer safety and hope to the millions of refugees, internally displaced persons, asylum seekers and statelessness looking to rebuild their lives? How can we foster durable solutions? As has been recalled, while Europe is receiving and hosting millions of refugees, nevertheless, the larger quantity of persons in need of international protection and internally displaced persons are hosted in fragile, low-income countries that are frequently also exposed to the additional challenges of insecurity and climate displacement and climate change. They bear the burden of hosting and supporting millions of displaced persons that often face limited access to basic services, economic opportunities and protection. And all this further contributes to their marginalization and the fragility of the host communities. And additionally, the presence of large displaced populations can strain social cohesion, exacerbate underlying ethnic or sectarian tensions, and potentially fuel further conflicts. Addressing forced displacement requires addressing underlying causes of fragility and promoting a comprehensive response where humanitarian, development and peace actors join efforts. The European Union is the forefront of the humanitarian response. This is well known. Colleagues of DG ECHO are not in this room at this moment. I will focus on the development response that within the Commission Services, Directorate General International Partnership and Director General for Neighbourhood and Enlargement are in charge of providing, notably through the Global Europe Fund, where indeed the indicative 10% spending target is supposed to cover not simply migration but also forced displacement. The use of development funds for responding to forced displacement is a reality since many years, and the European Union was at the forefront of stressing the importance to use development funds to that direction, in addition to the humanitarian. This started with the adoption on a policy based on the inclusion on the basis of the Commission communication presented in 2016 on lives in dignity from aid dependence to self-reliance, that almost anticipated the concept then expressed through the Global Compact on refugees, where the main objective was to ensure that forced displacement does not become protracted, or at least if it is protracted, it is helped to be transformed from the dependency on humanitarian assistance into social and professional inclusion and durable solutions at local level or through resettlement or repatriation whenever possible. The Global Europe Fund, that is the main tool for DG INPA and DG NERA within the Commission services to address forced displacement situations. In just 2 years from the start of its implementation in the summer 2021, we are now in summer 2023, has already been massively mobilized for forced displacement situations, and that includes both supporting refugees and those communities, internally displaced people, as well as also trying, whenever possible, to address root causes of forced displacement. For an overall amount that is beyond 2 billion euros, if we take into account the actions that have already been adopted and those that have been put by the Commission services in the pipeline in view of adoption. This includes indeed the actions from Latin America and the Caribbean region into Sub-Saharan Africa, to the North Africa, to Asia, and including also the support to Syrian refugees in Turkey. Funds are supporting, as we said, refugee and IDPs communities or their host communities, and mostly help them to have access to social services such as education, health, or to self-relying activities, or to enhance the capacities of those communities to provide access to these social services, avoiding that host communities are destabilized by the presence of so many new arrivals. The policy aiming at supporting refugees and IDPs has been also progressively enriched and expanded recently, also with an increased attention to persons that are displaced in relation to climate change or environmental degradation. This is a topic at which we are also increasingly attentive. The European Union is, since July last year, the chair of the Platform for Disaster Displacement, and we are very much working with all other stakeholders in integrating the climate dimension into the nexus work. Also because indeed there is a vicious circle of fragility that is triggered by the presence of insecurity, the presence of humanitarian situations. We do all this hand in hand with a Commissioner for Refugees. We are doing this through sharing information, through exchanging views, and also through deep dives. We are focusing today on Democratic Republic of Congo case, and this is by chance a country where myself with Mrs. Rockenfeller and leading 2 missions, we have done this exactly. We do joint mission and the discussion also to more closely understand how we can better mobilize the resources available and how can we identify better priorities. To respond also to a question that has been raised in a previous intervention, internally displaced people are also at the very center of our attention. And notably, we do our best in the programming exercise to ensure that their presence and their specific needs are taken into account, notably in all programs that are aimed at enhancing the access of citizens of the beneficiary countries to social services, notably on education and on health. Actions is focused on a number of countries. As I said, we operate from Colombia and Peru, where the Venezuela refugee crisis is at the center of the story, up to the Rohingya situation in Bangladesh. So cases are very different, also depending on the reaction by the authorities of the countries, that in some cases have a very inclusive approach, in other cases accept only an in-camp policy. And we try to push forward in order to have openness towards social inclusion of the refugees. That is the approach that the EU promotes, implements at home and promotes all over the world. But we need, in some cases, also to adapt ourselves to the situation, policy situation we face. The presentation could be different from country to country. If we zoom into the situation of the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is indeed of top importance at African level, one and at global level, for the combination of more than 500,000 of refugees and 6 million and beyond internally displaced persons. We are operating in close combination with the colleagues dealing with humanitarian assistance. And we have been focusing on three main priority areas. First, to support the sustainable economic opportunities, improving livelihoods, notably through access to vocational training programs, entrepreneurship development, and access to finance for small business. The second area has been, as mentioned earlier, supporting access to basic services and social protection. And the third one, ensuring protection and having strengthened governance and security for all of them, particularly also for internally displaced persons. In the case of the Democratic Republic of Congo, as you know, a law on refugees is established, and the system is relatively stable. But in the case of the internally displaced person, work is still to be done. The country has recently domesticated the Kampala Convention, but many actions still are needed in order to ensure that the government has a real follow-up on the specific needs of the internally displaced persons. Beyond the action that we...
If you may proceed to your end, because we are exceeding the timing for the presentations, and there should be some ground for discussion. We thank you.
Absolutely. I conclude by saying that the action is also at regional level, and also we support the approach that has been launched by the Commissioner for Refugees to have a regional support platform. We work with them, and again, it's in all continents. I conclude by saying that the Commission is preparing for the second edition of the Global Refugee Forum, which will be an important moment for the European Union to reaffirm its strong support to refugees and their hosting communities, and for demonstrate all the important mobilization of resources at policy level, at financial level, that we have been doing until now, and we intend to continue. Thank you, Chair.
We thank you too. We thank you three, of course. Mr. Lieutenant, Mr. Rockenfeller, and Ginny, who was the first of our guest speakers. But I guess that should be now the time for the members to show their views and share them loud. I suggest a first round of speaking time for every political group. I understand that it'll be 1.5 minutes each, if you may. There would be yes, sure. Mrs. Hojska, would you like to take the floor on your behalf? EPP, please do it. 1.5 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to speak in Polish. Dlaczego mamy do czynienia?
Why are we dealing with these forgotten conflicts or forgotten humanitarian crises? Currently, help or even humanitarian policy is not based on a real scale of a crisis, but what the media, on the media attention. If the conflict is long and the media has no new information to communicate, they stop talking about a given event, and this makes people and even organizations which do not get new information about the conflict start forgetting about them, especially in the face of a new disaster or a new war. As you know, on the border between Poland and Belarus, for 2 years we've had a humanitarian crisis. Nothing has changed, and unfortunately the media is not as active there as they used to be. Therefore, I always have questions and surprise from other people that there still is a crisis going on. There is one more aspect here, of course. The media were not being led to report about this conflict, because this conflict was supposed to be forgotten. It was not supposed to be presented in the media, so that the citizens do not think and do not care about those who die in the forests on the border. This is why our humanitarian policy should be based on real measures and not on media attention. Humanitarian policy should also focus on creating human awareness on the real scale of the crisis, and it should have the tools to direct the interests of the media to these areas which are starting to be forgotten. Only in this way the policy of the EU will create the interest of the media, and not the other way around. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Sohoika. Now for the S&D, maybe Isabel Santos, you got 1 minute and a half.
In Portuguese, those that need earphones, please.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to say that it is very important to hold this debate at a time when the EU is preparing to approve many legal instruments in support of our migratory policy, which will then influence all of our migratory policy. Now, these are not the instruments that we wanted to have on the table, but they are now possible after years of complete paralysis in the search for solutions that were never found. However, they will not give an answer to a multitude of problems that are only getting worse in different parts of the world. Displacements last longer because conflicts are also lasting longer. And the level needed to respond to these displacements is not the same as a short-term displacement. All of this, the conflicts and these long-term displacements, on top of all this, we see another set of forced displacements, which is everything having to do with the climate issue. And we really don't have an answer to that. It's very important to rethink about the humanitarian aid given by the EU. And it is important that that humanitarian aid keep in mind that many countries are losing entire generations. The younger generations are completely lost in refugee camps where they don't have access to a normal life in a community, where they don't have proper access to schooling, and where many of them don't even have any hopes of actually being educated. I was in Lebanon last week, and I could see on the ground the situation of many young people who wish to study, who would like to go to university, but there simply are no conditions for them to go to university because they can barely survive And if they go to university, they won't be able to actually work because they don't have access to the job market. So we need to ensure a proper life cycle for all these people. And this is all linked to the investments that we make and in the way in which these investments are used. The fact that we delegate humanitarian aid often means this aid is very expensive, and money that should go to the people who need it is actually, in reality, being used to keep going a situation that we shouldn't be feeding into. So it's a lot of food for thought. Thank you.
We only have half an hour to go, and there are many of you listed. And it's, after all, it's 3 committees. And I should also mind the representatives not only of LIBE, but also of DROI, of course, and DEVE. I understand that for DROI, Maria Arena is now willing to step in, but try to make it in 1 minute and a half.
Merci.
1 minute et demie, je vous en prie.
Merci. Donc, moi, j'aborderai...
Thank you. I have 3 points I'd like to mention. First of all, we've mentioned this idea of camps, which might seem like a humanitarian solution that is efficient in the short term. I was in Pakistan after the floods, and there was no solution then than to choose to create emergency camps. But too often we see that camps are seen as a way to keep populations under control. This is the policy that we are doing here in the EU when we keep refugees in camps, and this is also what is happening in third countries. So we need to look at alternative methods to camps. How are they assessed, and what is the cost of using an alternative? Just 2 days ago in the ACP meeting, those countries were telling us that if we called upon solidarity from local communities, it would cost a lot less to the international community. So has there been any kind of assessment that would show how we could be more efficient and more humane? My second question has to do with governance. Very often we see displaced persons who come from forgotten regions, and they're kept in other forgotten regions. You mentioned that we need to look at internally displaced people with a more holistic point of view. So how do you make a link between the humanitarian approach and development aid so that we can be more efficient? And finally, when it comes to the consistency of our policies, in the interparliamentary meeting with the ACP countries, we also discussed that we're going to have a law for the access to critical minerals for Europeans. And that, as we know, will destabilize many countries because there will be land grabs, and land grabs means displacement of people. It means security issues. So when we pass laws on critical raw materials, do we have an impact assessment on human rights and displacements? Because and what all this could entail for countries in the medium and long term. Thank you.
Sie. Und jetzt, es ist Kirsten Duque für den DEWE-Ausschuss, Mitglied der DEWE-Ausschuss, 1 Minute und halb.
1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'm going to speak in German. Maybe that helps for the 1.5 minutes. Also, es gibt ja immer...
Well, when we talk about this debate, we've got the micro level and the macro level. We've heard a great deal about the micro level, but I think if we look at the wider political situation, you have to look at the wider picture. We don't even want people to have to flee their countries in the first place. If you look at war and conflict as the cause, it can be poverty, climate change, standards of living, the labour market, many other factors that. And we look at these; they're reflected in the sustainability targets. We're now at the half point, and we know very well that we can do so much more. We can do so much better. We haven't done our homework. And these are the investments that actually make it possible to avoid potential flight and people having to leave. Now, even though it's World Refugee Day, let's not forget those people who are being prevented from fleeing, who are forced to stay in conflict areas, who are forced to stay in these situations, and we can't forget these people. We don't want to forget their plight, and that's millions of people who are in that situation. If we come back to the micro level, and we're not talking only about managing flows of people fleeing. I know this sounds very technical. Also, in those regions where you have conflicts, well, yes, there's the call for money. That's very frequently said, and I don't want to spend too much time stressing that point. But everything going beyond managing the humanitarian crisis. I know we've had this element managed in the opening speech. We need to think about involving the local level better. When it comes to sanctions, other policies, we really need to rethink our approach and kind of move away from the standard approach when it comes to aid and development support. We need to be more pragmatic in the way we handle these things. That's my wish.
It was Sophie Invel, but she left, so we move to Tineke Strick. Make it in 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks a lot for the three speakers, and more specifically to Mr. Bahati Mnyci, because it was very impressive also because he really shows that protection is so much more than only non-refoulement. Protection is about offering people a real chance to build a new future, to develop themselves, to live together with their family members, and to really ensure sustainable protection and to find themselves again. And that would be the only way to give them again their right to dignity back. And this is what we often forget when we discuss about refugee policies. And I'm also very happy for the two other speakers that also emphasized the need for people to really develop themselves and give having a new future. But if I look at the EU performances, the policies, I really have a lot of concerns about do we really contribute to that sufficiently. If I think of the Global Compact on the refugees, where EU member states also gave fully endorsement of the need to share the responsibility for refugees worldwide, and I see what is happening at the moment, where the EU is directing to, I see a huge mismatch and I see a huge gap. And I wonder how we could get out of that and go into the direction of really take an active part in this responsibility for refugees worldwide. I see really a tendency of shifting responsibility internally. We just pay off our responsibility to the border countries, but also through the deals that we conclude with third countries. And of course, it's true, a lot of development funding is also going to displaced persons. But it's also more and more used for agreements on migration cooperation, mainly focusing on border control and returns. And if I see, but hopefully you can rebut this, but my impression is that if you look at how the money is spent, the vast majority goes to those restrictive measures instead of offering and supporting people in this new future and access to education, etc., etc. Maybe you can, hopefully you have other figures, but this is my impression. And also the increasing use of conditionality means that we make it subject to their cooperation on returns and border controls instead of, for instance, saying we offer substantial funding, really enough and timely, but please make sure that people are not staying in a protracted situation, that they can really develop themselves. And of course, I see the constraints where there are many refugees being hosted, but access to education, we could support them in funding it and to really make their life more worthwhile. I don't know how much time
Three minutes. You have doubled your dose, Tineke. So please, before getting started, try to phrase your mind to 1.5 minutes. Just it's a psychological exercise. Mm-hmm. Psychological exercise. I mean, you know that you cannot state your whole storytelling. That you have to encapsulate it to the shortest version possible before getting started. Because I don't want to break in. I want to interrupt you. But there's a list, and then we should be given the chance for the three speakers in a row and the Commission, which is also invited, to have some say after having heard of you. So please try to phrase your minds as to 1.5 minutes, because there's 3 committees. Please, before getting started. Now we move on to Eric Marquardt, DEVE.
Yes, but actually Tineke also took the time for the drug committee. But yeah, I will speak in German.
Well, I think it's very important that we draw attention to these hidden crises, and that's only possible if we are honest with ourselves. And if we are honest about what the situation is on our external borders, we can't really try to hide what's going on there. If we can't achieve some visibility for the projects, if we look at what's going on with the Libyan Coast Guard, for example, then it's going to be very difficult for us to shed a light on what's going on in Congo, Yemen, or elsewhere, or in Syria, for example. And it's going to be harder to resolve the problems that exist elsewhere if we're sending out a message from Europe that protection for refugees is not at the top of the agenda for governments. And I think it has to be said that refugee law isn't in fact being protected by the governments in member states. It's the courts that are still safeguarding it. And I think that's how asylum law is being safeguarded. And I don't want to get too drawn out in my explanation of this, but I do have a question for the Commission. How can we make things more transparent? What is the European Union doing with EU taxpayers' money? It's extremely difficult for us as MEPs to understand which projects are being funded, with which objective, what the outcomes are of the project, and then, if we are racking our brains trying to figure out what's being done, what money's going to, then we can't be surprised if citizens are confused.
Oh, for the DEVE ECR.
I speak about the language. Bardzo ważna debata, potrzebna.
A very important debate and very much needed. I've been here for 19 years, and this problem has become more and more of a challenge for us as the EU. And I want to say that the biggest refugee crisis in Europe is an effect, a consequence of Russian invasion on Ukraine. 8 million of Ukrainians were looking for help, and in my country, I think the biggest group of refugees got such help and assistance. As many as 80% of Poles were directly involved in help by collecting money, giving help in kind, even giving their apartments or rooms in their homes. We have situations where we have no camps for refugees. They live with Poles, with their apartments, with the apartments that have been rented for them. And it's worth saying that 190,000 children from Ukraine is using, free of charge, for using Polish educational system, and 1.5 million of Ukrainians has an national identification number, the same as Polish citizens. They can use all the public services, social services, just like Polish citizens. And the last thing, one last sentence, we have spent 10 billion euros for that. We received from EU funding around 200 million, which is 100 euros per head. And the new migration pact wants to fine us 20,000 euros for each migrant that we do not take. But this is a strange solidarity for me.
Now, I think we should hear from Madame Chagnon, but she left for ID. So we move on to Kostas Alvaritis, the left.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ.
Thank you, Chair. There are two Europes. There is the Europe that makes conclusions and the Europe that does not understand. Mr. Christopoulos, professor in Athens, had said that we would have found the solution to the refugee question if it were a different question. Mr. Bullman said that borders should be a meeting point and not a rejection point. Some people in my country would not agree. They would talk about treason. They would talk about a problem and not about a dream. Or what Mr. Weber said, that fences are a taboo, and what I would like to say today, since we're talking about the World Refugee Day, is it a day for refugees or against refugees? We should say something to those people who have been lost, people in the shipwreck in Kithira or in Melilla. What can we tell those people? When these people drown, we state that the problem is the smugglers, and we do not state that Europe is a sponsor of smugglers. This is hypocrisy. We will be here for one more year in our mandate. All democratic forces should try and convince citizens to do their best, because it is a real concern for me what the next European Parliament's composition will be able to do. What will be the prevailing opinion in the next parliamentary term? Will we help the refugees or will we let them drown? Thank you.
From some other members which are attending and have asked for the floor, Mr. Zorriño, Carlos Zorriño, tiene un minuto y medio.
Thank you, President. The sound, we're not getting sound, the interpreters have...
Macro. No? Mike?
Mic is open.
Thank you, we now have sound.
Very, very quickly, now I will return my presentation.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Dear colleagues, thank you for your presentations. In 2023, we expect that 170 million people will be forced to flee, and 23.9 million will be fleeing, and children. And we see these numbers are very shocking, and we see there's a need to move away. People who are fleeing their everyday situations to seek a better life. Now, I'm very speaking here on behalf of those who are in forgotten crises, forgotten refugee situations, and we need measures and innovative solutions for these people. These are very much needed, and we need additional funding. We need, and we will propose new interventions for humanitarian aid and a triple nexus. Now we're going to find effective solutions to protect refugees so that we can have people, no one being left behind. This exchange of views today is an important contribution to this, and I thank you for it. It's very enriching, and it will help the Parliament in its work on the proposal it will vote on by the end of this year. Now, this Parliament has taken a very pertinent step today on the World Refugee Day.
Minuto y medio.
Thank you, Chair, and I will speak in Spanish. Please put on the headphone. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you once again to Mr. Bahati for his testimony. It's very, very real, this experience of a refugee, and I thank you for the UNHCR for promoting this joint meeting, bringing three committees together. It's very pertinent for us to hold this. The things I'd like to propose, I think that it's very clear that the refugee population is going to continue to grow because of conflicts on the rise, but also because of climate change and the impact of climate change. We have every indication that 143 million people will be forced to flee and cross borders between now and 2050. And so the European Parliament needs to recognize the link between climate change and migration. Secondly, we need to move towards a definition of climate refugee. Now, I know this is a term, it's a complex that perhaps doesn't enjoy consensus but amongst all people, but I think it's something we should try to achieve. And no other parliaments have done so in the Kampala agreement, in the African Parliament, and also in Latin America. Now, we need to increase extend the protection mechanism to include climate. Now, I know there's going to be some time needed for us to achieve this, to understand which climate events would be considered for this as having a life-threatening nature. Different European courts may be able to involve, for example, the Human Rights Court of the United Nations. We have a case with Seychelles, and for someone from Bangladesh, for example, but and also the Andaman Islands. So we have a number of different case law being developed, and when it comes to the forgotten crises, I thank the UNHCR for the presentation that we heard. We have 3 different countries, 3 political groups that have come together to try and put together an exhibition to draw people's attention to the problem, to the plight of Ukrainian refugees, but also we shouldn't forget the many other countries that are in crisis. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Is there anyone else willing to contribute to the discussion? I wouldn't like to miss any one of you. Would you? No, if not, would you? No, if not the case. If it's not the case, then we turn back to our guest speakers. We've heard their reactions. Absolutely moved by the compelling testimonies we heard of, and of course concerned about this ongoing forgotten crisis and what the European Union should do about it. Certainly it should do better. Certainly it should do better. That is for sure. I mean, that is the common ground here. There must be discussion as to which extent, how far, but anyhow it should do better. Because there is also a consensus that simply denying facts or ignoring the suffering which is underlying the trend of people expelled from the countries where they were born in the first place would lead us nowhere. So we hear from you now. I suggest we turn back to our speakers, each by one. Let's say I am suggested 3-4 minutes maximum each of you, getting started with the first one, Mr. Bahati Mnyci, I don't know how to pronounce it. But please, if you are connected, the floor is yours. Yes. Mr. Bahati.
Yes, thank you, chairs, once again. And thank you once again for this opportunity, because this opportunity means a lot to me. And it means a lot to me in the sense that I'm not only speaking for myself, but I'm speaking for many other people out there who are in the same situation that I went through, that I am right now testifying and actually representing for. So for me, the most important thing that I feel is something that can actually provide hope to anyone who is displaced and affected with this crisis. Education for me has been a fundamental tool. And I believe that through education, many young people who are refugees can find hope and can actually be able to be people who can contribute greatly to their communities, even to the world at large. Because today, if we look in history, Albert Einstein was a refugee as well. But today, Albert Einstein scholarship, Duffy Scholarship, is the one actually helping many refugees to go to higher tertiary education. So let us give each and everyone on this world a chance. We are here in the world, we have only one race, which is the human race. We should all treat each other the same, and we should give each other a chance to contribute in this world. There are many young, talented people in the refugee camps who can actually make change and actually create even employment for many people out there. But because they do not have a chance, their dreams are shattered. Their dreams are forgotten. So if these people get a chance, they are nurtured and given the opportunity, to become what they ought to be and to realize their vision, we can make the world a better place. I thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Bahati. We really thank you. We're honored to have you among us, and we wish you well, not only in your master's degree, the rest of the life waiting ahead of you. And of course, you made the right point. You represent not only yourself, but all of the human beings that are comprehended in your experience of striving and surviving so much. So we thank you for that. We appreciate it. Mrs. Rockenfeller, the floor goes to you. 3-4 minutes, if you may.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to all your compelling statements. Let me start maybe by the macro level that one of you mentioned. Yes, responsibility sharing is not about additional financing only. It is about how to share responsibility in other ways as well. This is what I had pointed to before, and looking at a comprehensive protection and solutions oriented manner that is coherent globally. The needs are, as you pointed out, are increasing. 117 million projected to the end of the year. We have increasing numbers of protracted refugee situations and more and proliferating conflict situation and fragile contexts. And more financing and more humanitarian response will not be sufficient on its own. So how do we go about it? And we need to address root causes. You mentioned it as well. If you look at the figures, 52% of all refugees and other people in need of international protection came only from 3 countries. So that is Syrian Arab Republic, Ukraine, and Afghanistan. So the task at hand is large, but it is also it's also contained to a certain degree. You can directly see that. In addition to addressing root causes, where the peace element comes in, we have to look at the humanitarian and development to gain a shared understanding of the situation, closest to where displacement happens. Not wait until until people reach and pass through many countries and risk protection challenges. We have to be, and how do we do that further? We have to be more effective, more efficient, and more coherent. I would like to mention 7 principles that the OECD DACAD came up with, just in terms of not just the principles, but what does it mean in concrete terms. For example, promoting and ending promoting a progressive refugee policy environment. What does that mean? Precisely, working with national authorities, governments, host communities to ensure inclusion into policies. We have seen that in Colombia, for example, where that has been taken forward very progressively in terms of providing work permits, etc., to people fleeing Venezuela. Adapting financing tools, I spoke about it, to fit reality of populations. What does it mean? Precisely flexibility of budgets between national, local levels, across regions, very important. Supporting local systems, some of you mentioned it, and national systems directly through financing at local levels, very important. Also, ensuring that people are, refugees and IDPs are reflected in the budgets, be it at national or local levels, so that the figures are there, so that when support is coming, that it reaches them. I've seen it myself in Afghanistan in 2018, where for 40 years, near a city, people, IDPs have been living in a settlement, and 40 years of water trucking has been ongoing. And any development project going towards that will ever capture those people, because they were never recorded in the budgets, in the local systems. So a humanitarian response cannot shoulder this. Bring development, peace intervention by default in addition to humanitarian responses. The Global Compact for Refugees is a good reflection of that. And promoting self-reliance for refugees and IDPs. Now, these are the 7 principles. We need to be evidence-based. That was also referred to. And look how we can work together towards achieving this closest to where displacement happens. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Luciani, please mind the timing, because you know that the interpretation cabin is an essential condition for the work we do here. Please do.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for all those that intervened and for the opportunity of this discussion. And we look forward also to have additional opportunities to exchange and also to provide even more detailed information on all what is being done and needs to be done to address the forced displacement situation. Indeed, I mean, there is a lot of information that is available, and depending on the specific interest, we are ready and available in writing or orally to come back and to provide all this information. And I would like to stress also that there is not a single cent that is spent by the Commission without the European Parliament knowing this well in advance, because under the comitology, no action document and no annual action program, no multi-annual action program can be adopted by the Commission without the scrutiny of the European Parliament taking place. But in any case, of course, there is a lot of other information that are relevant and can be shared when it comes to the implementation of the actions, and we are ready to provide this. And of course, we also struggle to know all what's happening all over the places, because we are indeed a number of actions, more than 100 are already in the pipeline or adopted in all continents. So it's not an easy task, but indeed that's our work, and we are ready to do this. I would like just to react to one of the other points that have been made, the question of the encampment. And I would like to stress once more time, I had already said this in my previous intervention, that encampment indeed takes place in the context of the emergencies. This is frequently the response provided by those delivering the humanitarian assistance, the first support. But it's absolutely not the EU policy, neither the High Commissioner for Refugees policy. On the contrary, we are hands in hands together with other actors to stop it as soon as possible when it's clear that the situation is protracted and there is no possibility of an easy and quick return. On the contrary, we push forward towards local integration whenever it's possible, which means indeed giving the possibility to move from the encampments towards normal settlements and possibly also merging into the local population. Access is given to education and health through specific facilities in the encampments when this is the only possibility. But otherwise, the idea of the development cooperation is exactly to give help the host communities to have reinforced social structures such as schools or hospitals, so as to allow refugees or IDPs to have access to the normal hospitals, normal schools that exist in the host communities. Frequently, however, the displaced persons are hosted in regions where not even the native population has already schools or hospitals. So this is really straining and challenging. But the idea is, of course, to move from the camps as soon as possible. But then we should never forget that we operate in third countries, and they are master on their territory. So we deal with countries that decide that the refugee tomorrow can live together with the others, compatriots, and other countries that forbid getting out from the camps. And in some cases, we have no leverage to change their policy approach. And so we have to adapt ourselves. And in a continuous policy negotiation that, again, accompany the use of financial resources, and we also on that we work together with High Commissioner for Refugees and the other donors. So we should bear in mind the importance of our resources, but also the limited impact that we can have on the territory of the others. that frequently don't want to be more forthcoming. I think I can stop there. Thank you.
Okay, and now before concluding remarks from my dear co-chairs, Mrs. Bresso and Mr. Bullman, I would suggest that the Commission would have a chance to make a comment and share a comment with us. The Commission, Esther Pozo, ¿quiere intervenir?
I was not going to intervene, but since I'm giving the floor very short, thank you very much, Chair and honourable members of the Parliament and distinguished speakers. Maybe just to react to about what we do inside the European Union. And here I think we have a unique opportunity now to try to get a European migration and asylum policy that is equipped to deal with the challenges we all are facing in the 21st century. When the Commission put forward our proposal, the objective was really to give life to Article 18 of the Charter, access to the asylum procedure, and also to the Article 80 of the treaty, the solidarity and fair share of responsibility. Our objective is to have swift and efficient access to the asylum procedure, a humane system that is fully respecting of international obligations and fundamental rights, with a meaningful solidarity and a truly fair and sustainable system for responsibility. And here is where we have to come together with the European strategy, because it's the only way the European Union can face the challenges ahead. The EU and the Commission is committed to ensure that the EU remains a place where refugees find protection and safety. And now with the institutional negotiations between the European Parliament and the Council on the different pieces of the Pact on Migration and Asylum, we have now the unique opportunity to have it. Might not be the perfect system, replying to what Mrs. Santos said, might not be the perfect system. It might be the only system we can have right now in the current policy context. But for sure, I think it will be better than what we have today, and it will help us all to deal together with these challenges and be better equipped, and will be a step forward. And this is what I hope that in the future we'll be able to get more integrated. So look at this pact as the step towards getting all together to create this European strategy and to give life to some of these principles that are essential and are the heart of the treaty and the European values we all withhold. And we have the commitment of both institutions, the European Parliament and the Council, as part of the roadmap to get this done before the end of this mandate. And you can count on the European Commission to do its best to be its honest broker to bring both institutions together. You are far apart, but there are many points in which you agree as well, even if sometimes it's not so obvious from the text. Thank you very much.
It's worthy giving you the floor, Mrs. Pozo. For sure, it was worthy because that is the spirit of our side from the European Parliament. We have done a part of the job. We are truly committed to strike a right balance in the common asylum system that is the European goal to be reached with the principles of shared responsibility and solidarity. Meaningful solidarity, enforceable solidarity, obligatory solidarity, binding solidarity, but meaningful solidarity and effective solidarity for sure. That is the pending issue, that is the pending challenge. So we're glad we heard from you, because we are counting on you, as you have said, as the good mediator between the Council and the European Parliament. We are just getting started with the trilogues. And we have a way to go, but not much time. Time is running out. And it's got to be in this mandate. This is a last chance to make it right. So we only have this meaningful purpose awaiting us to be delivered before the European elections, because people are there watching us, watching over us, and they are putting pressure on every representative directly elected to this House, and that is the way we see it, our duty. So I turn back the floor to Mercedes Bresso and Udo Bullman for the final remarks.
Proprio un minuto, intanto.
Well, just a minute, really. I mean, I fully share what our chairman has just said, of course. And let me just recall one aspect of all of this. I mean, European funds, for a whole series of reasons, ending up being spent in ways that are then harder to scrutinise. I mean, look at the Global Gateway, for example. It's used for a whole series of things, but it basically makes it more difficult for Parliament to scrutinise what's being done with the funds. So I just wanted to say that we shouldn't forget that the Parliament has a right to scrutiny, and that can't be undermined via policies, which we also share, actually. I mean, they're often the right choices being made, but they can't deprive the Parliament of its rights. Thank you. So thank you again. Thank you to all our speakers for what you've told us. You've given us a lot of information. That's very useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Juan Fernando, and thanks, colleagues, for this meeting. Once Ms. Rockenfeller for the UNHCR is going to mention that more than 50% of refugees come from 3 countries. Mentioning Syria, Ukraine, and Afghanistan, we could feel tempted to get in the question, how come? Because immediately we see that each of these countries have a story. And we don't have the time today, but number one for me is that peacekeeping and strengthening a multilateral system is the best of all possible preventions for people suffering on their long way to other countries. Secondly, when we realize the new challenge of climate change, then we can immediately conclude that Antonio Guterres' Agenda 2030 reform sustainable development goals is the best prevention against creating new refugee problems because of environmental disasters. And thirdly, our values are okay. Our legal construction is better than in most parts of the world. Let's watch that we do not deviate. And where we got on the wrong track, let's repair that. Thank you.
Thank you. It was quite a conversation, the one we had on the World Refugee Day. We thank you all for your contributions, and not to abuse the time that the interpretation cabin has spared on us. We thank you, and that'll be it by now. The next meeting of the Libe Committee will be taking place July 6, 2023, by 9 a.m. Okay, bye now. Have a nice lunch.